Hi, fourth grade. We're going to quickly review comparing fractions before we move on to ordering fractions tonight. So remember, as we learned in class, when you compare fractions, you're looking for which fraction is greater. So when we compare, we use the symbols greater than, less than, or equal to. And remember, when something is greater than, I use the analogy of, kind of a mouth. And we want to eat the number that is bigger, the number that is greater. So the wider part of the mouth would face towards whichever fraction or whichever number is larger. So in this example, we can easily see that 5/8 over here is greater than 3/8. We can look at the picture and see that it is a larger fraction, okay? And we can also look at the numerator. Because the denominator is the same, we know that 5 is greater than 3. So we would use our greater than symbol here. Let's look at two more fractions and practice comparing. So in this first example right here, we have 2/5 and 4/5. And although we don't have a picture to help us visualize, we know that both of these fractions have the same denominator. They're broken up into the same amount of equal parts. So all we have to do is look at the numerator. We know that 4 is greater than 2, so 4/5 is greater than 2/5. Over here in this example, we have a similar situation. The denominator in both fractions is 9. So both of these fractions are broken up into 9 equal parts. So in this situation, 7 of those shaded would be greater than 5 shaded. So 7/9 is greater than 5/9. Well, now we have, a difficulty. What do we do if the denominator is different? How do we compare them? Well, in this example, we have visuals. We have pictures of the fractions, which makes it easier. We can visualize and easily see that 3/4 is greater than or more than 3/8, okay? But we don't always have a picture of the fractions to help us. So we need to be able to compare them using our mathematical skills, okay? Well, just like we've talked about earlier this year, when we compare things, we can't compare apples and oranges because they're different. So just like that, we can't compare fractions that have different denominators. They have to have the same denominator. So it's like comparing apples and apples. Then you can compare which apple is bigger, this one or this one, okay? So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. The rule is to compare fractions with different denominators, you must turn them into fractions with the same denominator using what we know about equivalent fractions. So the goal of this is not to simplify the fraction, but just to make sure that both of them have the same denominator, okay? Well, I personally think doing multiplication is easier than division. So I'm going to multiply this fraction in order to turn it into 12ths. So we have, let me start over. We have this example, we're comparing 3/4 and 10/12ths, okay? So we want to have the denominators match. We want them to have the same denominator. So we can either turn both denominators into fourths or both denominators into 12ths. And like I was just saying, I think multiplication is easier, so I'm choosing to use 12ths, and I think you'll choose to do that as well. So when we think back to how to create equivalent fractions, we have that rule. Whatever you do to the top, you gotta do to the bottom, okay? So we're going to turn our 4 into 12ths. The goal is for our denominator to be 12ths. So we need to think about, how do we turn 4 into 12? Well, we multiply it by 3. We all know that 4 times 3 equals 12, okay? And we go back to our rule. Whatever you do to the bottom, you gotta do to the top. So I'm also going to multiply the top by 3. And now, 3 times 3 is 9. 9/12ths is equivalent to 3/4ths. So I now have two fractions with matching denominators. So now I can go ahead and compare. And now it's easy. I know that 10 is greater than 9. So 10/12ths is greater than 9/12ths, or 10/12ths is greater than 3/4ths. Let's look at one more example. So for you division lovers out there, we can look at these fractions, and you can also find an equivalent fraction by dividing. Which we know because we've simplified fractions. So if we want our denominator to be 6, we have 4/12ths and 5/6ths. So say we want our denominators to match. I know that 12 divided by 2 is 6, okay? So again, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So 4 divided by 2 equals 2. So now my equivalent fractions, 4/12 equals 2/6. So I now have two fractions I can compare, 2/6 or 5/6. Well, I know 5/6 is greater. Well, we're going to use those same tools that we used for comparing fractions and transfer them into ordering fractions. So ordering fractions, basically what that means is putting them in order from least to greatest. So when we order whole numbers, if I had 5, 9, 2, excuse my horrible handwriting, and I wanted to put them in order from least to greatest, we know the order would be 2, 5, 9, okay? So the same thing goes for fractions. So again, it's always easier to compare fractions or to order fractions when you have a visual. You know, I'm a visual person. It's easy for me to see that this right here, 1/2, is the smallest fraction, okay? So if I were to order it, this would be the first one, right? Then looking at these two, you know, it's pretty easy for me to judge that this is a smaller fraction than this, okay? So this would be second. If I was putting them in order, this would be third. So I would then say that these fractions would be in order as 1/2 is the least, then 5/8, then 3/4 is the greatest. But we're not always going to have pictures of fractions and visuals. So again, you need to know how to do it mathematically. Okay, so if we're ordering fractions with the same denominators, it's really easy. All you have to do is look at the numerator. Okay, so we know that 1/6 is smaller than 2/6, and 5/6 is the greatest. So the order would be 1/6, 2/6, 5/6. So again, you just have to look at the numerator, okay? But unfortunately, our denominators are not always going to be the same. If you have unlike denominators, like the example below, you must first rename each fraction as equivalent fractions with the same denominator. Well, so let's look at our fractions. We have 1/2, we have 7/10, and we have 3/10. Two of the fractions are already in tenths. So we're going to take this 1/2 and using what we know about equivalent fractions, we're going to create an equivalent fraction with the denominator 10. So how do we change 1/2 to an equivalent fraction with a 10 in the denominator? Well, we think about 2 times what equals 10. Well, that should be a fast fact that you guys know really well. 2 times 5 equals 10, right? Easy peasy. And then we go back to that golden rule with fractions. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So we're going to now multiply the top by 5 as well, okay? So that tells us, 1 times 5 we know is 5, that 1/2 is equal to 5/10. So now I have these three fractions that have the same denominator. So it's really easy for me to put them in order. Okay, if I put them in order, again, I just have to look at the numerator once the denominator is the same. So 3, then 5, then 7. 3/10, 5/10, 7/10. We're going to do one more together, and then you are on your own for this last one. So here's our example number 1. You're going to do number 2 on your own in your spiral, all right? So we're looking at these three fractions, and again, we want to order them. We want to put them in order from least to greatest. We have 1/6, 1/2, and 4/6. So two of my fractions are already in sixths, so I'm going to change my 1/2 to sixths as well, okay? So again, I want my denominator to be in sixths. So I write that next to 1/2. And then I have to think to myself, how do I turn a half into a sixth? Okay, well, I know that 2 times 3 equals 6. And we go back to that rule. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So since I multiplied the bottom by 3, I'm going to multiply the top by 3. Easy peasy, 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, and these are equivalent fractions. So 1/2 is equal to 3/6. So now I have these three fractions that all have the same denominator. So I can go ahead and just look at the numerator and put them in the correct order. And here's the correct order from least to greatest. Okay, so I'd like you to try this last one on your own. You're dealing with 6/9, 1/3, and 2/9, and please put them in order from least to greatest. All right, great job. Thanks, 4th grade.